Thank you for joining Achieving Cures Together's virtual event, Spread Hope. My name is Christy Lansdowne, and I serve as ACT's Executive Director. Our microbiome holds the key to so many elements of our health, and dysregulation of our gut microbiome has become more and more prevalent due to our super-hygienic lifestyles, increased use of antibiotics, and diets filled with processed foods. As a result, many serious health conditions have emerged. Researchers have discovered more and more connections between the lack of diversity in our gut microbiome and many serious health conditions. This evening, we'll have the opportunity to hear from many of the top researchers in this field, including Dr. Alexandra Koritz, one of the pioneer researchers of intestinal microbiota transplants at the University of Minnesota, Dr. Byron Vaughn, gastroenterologist at the University of Minnesota and lead researcher of the Ulcerative Colitis clinical trial, Dr. Shernan Holton, hematologist and oncologist at the University of Minnesota studying graft versus host disease, and Doctors James Adams and Rosa Kravmalnik-Brown, lead researchers of the autism clinical trial at Arizona State University. It's my pleasure to now welcome ACT founder Peter Westerhaus.
When Achieving Cures Together was founded 5 years ago, we knew from personal experience how important it was to restore your microbiome. At the time, about 30,000 people died a year from Clostridium difficile, an antibiotic-resistant superbug. From those 5 years, Achieving Cures Together has helped treat over 800 people suffering from C. difficile, with a success rate around 98%. We didn't ever imagine how many research topics and different implications that this type of microbial restoration could ultimately affect. Today, our research is focusing on advanced liver disease, autism, Parkinson's, ulcerative colitis, and many, many more. So we're here this evening to first and foremost thank you. None of this would be possible without your support and your generosity, and your contributions are continuing to push this research forward. Today we're going to share different snippets of research from some of the world-leading microbiome researchers. We hope that you can learn something and will continue to support this life-saving research.
Thanks, Peter. Hello and good evening. I'm Brendan Halloran, the MC from last year's Achieving Cures Together event. This year, obviously things are a little bit different, and I have the pleasure and privilege to be coming to you virtually into your own homes. It's our pleasure to introduce Dr. James Adams and Dr. Rosie Kravmalnik-Brown, leaders in autism research at Arizona State University. As you're watching, feel free to submit any questions on Facebook or the Ask the Researchers button on our website. Be sure to check our blog next week for the coming responses.
Many children with autism suffer from gastrointestinal symptoms like constipation, diarrhea, bloating. My collaborator Jim Adams and I have been working on the relationship between microbiota in the gut and autism for more than 10 years. And we found that a strong reason why these problems occur are abnormal bacteria in the gut of kids with autism. Children with autism are missing many beneficial microbes, hundreds and hundreds of species. These beneficial microbes are so important for our health because these microbes help us digest our food, they help us stay healthy, they produce vitamins, they line our intestines, they train our immune system. So they do so much for us that when you're missing them, that of course affects your health. They also produce some chemicals that communicate with our brain.
And so as Dr. Rosie says, the issue is that because these children are missing many beneficial bacteria, we investigated a new, very exciting treatment in which we took gut bacteria from healthy, carefully screened donors and transferred them into children with autism. And we found great improvements. We found about a 60% reduction in gut symptoms, about almost 50% reduction in autism symptoms after 2 years. So very exciting, very dramatic improvement in these children. And because of that, the FDA has granted us fast track status for this exciting new treatment. This research has only been possible because Achieving Cures Together provided funding to the University of Minnesota to produce these very high quality microbiota capsules using a process that they patented, and which essentially acts like a super probiotic. So now we're just beginning to new studies, one for children with autism, one for adults with autism. We've had over 2,000 children and adults apply for these studies. So there's a lot of excitement in the autism community because these gut problems are such a major issue, and we now have high hopes for treating them.
What we need in order to move forward our studies is we need more of this very good microbiota that is produced for us at the University of Minnesota in order to be able to advance the trials that we have ongoing right now. And we're also investigating what are the mechanisms, how are these microorganisms interacting with each other and with us, and what are they doing? What are the chemicals that they are producing? We're investigating this in order to be able to find possibly other treatments and novel diagnostics too. So this research is really, really important. So please consider making a contribution.
Intestinal microbiota transplants are revolutionizing the treatment options available for individuals with autism. Would you consider partnering with us towards this important goal? If so, we have an incredible opportunity for you this week. An anonymous donor has agreed to $70,000 matching for this week only. You can go ahead and check our progress on our website, which will be updated daily. Now, we will hear from two researchers at the University of Minnesota and their research on microbial health. First, we'll hear from Dr. Byron Vaughn on his research regarding ulcerative colitis, and then we'll hear from Dr. Shernan Holton on her research regarding graft versus host disease.
My name is Byron Vaughn, and I'm a physician. I'm a gastroenterologist at the University of Minnesota, and I work with Dr. Colitis. I'm here to talk today about how achieving cures together has helped my research. So I study ulcerative colitis. Ulcerative colitis is a condition where the immune system of your body attacks your colon and the gut bacteria in your colon. We don't know exactly what causes or triggers the inflammation, but the end result is inflammation in the colon, and this can be a life-debilitating disease leading to bloody diarrhea, weight loss, increasing the risk of colon cancer, and having people ultimately end up having their colon taken out, which is a really big surgery and comes with its own set of complications. Unfortunately, right now, the only way that we have to manage ulcerative colitis is to dial down the immune system. These therapies do not actually treat the underlying cause. We're treating the secondary inflammation, but we're not actually getting at the cause. There's a lot of consequences to the therapies too, and those can include injection site reactions, infusion reactions, infections, and even in some cases causing cancer. So ideally, these are not the best therapies that we have. What's exciting about using gut bacteria is the shift away from immune suppression and the shift towards changing the stimulus for inflammation. We think that if we can change the stimulus for the inflammation, we can just leave the immune system alone and let the body heal on its own. And that's ultimately one of our goals. There have been a couple of studies already that have looked at using fecal microbiota transplants, or FMTs, for ulcerative colitis. And in general, they've all shown a trend to success. When all four of these trials were pooled together, there's about a 20% reduction in symptoms. Now, 20% may not sound great to you, but that's actually as good as all of our biologics. So interestingly enough, after 8 weeks, this therapy seems to be as good in very early studies as some of our mainstay biologic medications that we use for ulcerative colitis. Our study is a little different in a couple ways. First, we're the first study to actually look at pills. The other studies have used FMT material either in repeated colonoscopies or enemas, which can be very challenging to take over and over. So our study is looking at a new way of administering these healthy gut bacteria to hopefully treat and mitigate this disease. Second, ours is one of the first studies that's actually looking at a rationally selected set of bacteria. Specifically, we have a theory that potentially too much hydrogen sulfide gas is bad. And so if we can put in bacteria into someone with ulcerative colitis that has a very low potential to create hydrogen sulfide, that will end up doing better than just any old bacteria that may or may not be healthy. So we have a rationally selected set of bacteria in the form of pills. We could not do any of this research without the support from Achieving Cures Together. And that is not an understatement. While we are actively getting funding from foundations and government agencies, sometimes this research is hard for grant agencies to fund because it is so exploratory and it is on the cusp. And so the only way to generate data to take this to the next step is by using philanthropy, is by funding. And so this absolutely would not be possible to do without donations from patients and loved ones and everyone who has supported our therapy. So thank you for those who have donated, because we could not do this without you. We are really excited to push this field forward, specifically with ulcerative colitis. Our first study is looking at what we call induction of remission for ulcerative colitis. We hope that we can use this to get more funding and look at larger trials that really look at how effective this can be in both improving clinical symptoms and treating the inflammation on colonoscopy. And that is the hard goal for ulcerative colitis, is healing the colon on the inside. Our current study will give us a suggestion of that based on symptoms and gut bacteria, but it's not going to be enough to get some of these what we call hard outcomes, such as endoscopic healing. We hope to look at that in the future. And more than that, we hope to look at how using this therapy could help people to maintain remission over months to years. There's a lot of other exciting ways that we envision studying how microbiota therapeutics can play into ulcerative colitis, including potentially stopping other medications and only using gut bacteria as therapy, changing your risk of colon cancer, and more. So I really think this is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of using microbiota therapeutics in ulcerative colitis. We also have a lot of hopes to look at this in Crohn's disease in the future, and we'll already have some very preliminary data looking at just the gut bacteria changes in people who have undergone surgery for Crohn's. So there's a lot more work to be done, and we're really excited to keep pushing it forward.
Hi, I'm Shernan Holton. I'm one of the blood and marrow transplant physicians at the University of Minnesota. Today I'd like to tell you about a patient of mine. This is a real life patient. So imagine a woman in her 50s, healthy, no medical history, mother, doing well, until she's diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia. This is a life-threatening cancer of the bone marrow. She is admitted to the hospital for treatment of this leukemia. It's a difficult leukemia, meaning it requires intensive chemotherapy to get into remission. So she receives that chemotherapy and unfortunately has some complications, as is common with intensive chemotherapy for leukemia. She develops fevers. She's treated with antibiotics. She gets more fevers, more antibiotics, and she develops a complication called Clostridium difficile colitis, or C. diff colitis. This is treated as well with antibiotics, and she improves, but unfortunately the chemotherapy didn't do enough to clear her bone marrow of her leukemia. She needed even stronger chemotherapy, and so after 14 days of the initial intensive chemotherapy, she actually has to receive even stronger chemo. This is at a time when her intestinal tract is already beaten down with chemotherapy and antibiotics and C. difficile colitis. She receives the intensive chemotherapy and has a bumpy course with more fevers, more infections, significant diarrhea, a lot of abdominal pain. She can't eat. She needs parenteral nutrition in order to receive enough calories to survive, but she makes it through. She's able to get out of the hospital. When her blood counts recover, her immune system recovers, she is finally in remission. The chemotherapy was able to get her leukemia back under control, and she leaves the hospital. So the initial chemotherapy worked. Our patient is in remission, but without an additional therapy, her leukemia will come back. So now she comes in back to the hospital for a bone marrow transplant. This is the only known cure for most of these difficult to treat leukemias. She receives more chemotherapy and more radiation to treat her leukemia, to get it completely in remission so that the new stem cells that we give her will take in her bone marrow. She unfortunately has more fevers, more infections as a result of the intensive chemotherapy and radiation. This is common, this is expected. Her C. difficile colitis comes back. We see this as well. This happens because of the intensity of the treatment that's required for her leukemia. But she gets her new stem cells and she is able to recover eventually. When her blood counts recover, they're her new donor stem cells. Her new immune system is coming in and she is able to leave the hospital. However, shortly after doing so, her new immune system kind of turned against her. She developed graft versus host disease as her new immune system recovered. Graft versus host disease is a life-threatening complication of blood and marrow transplantation where the donor immune cells attack tissues and organs. This is a common complication of blood and marrow transplantation. The most serious organ that can be affected is the intestinal tract, and this often occurs after someone had prior damage to their intestinal tract from previous chemotherapy, radiation, or infections, and she had all of these. She developed significant intestinal GVHD, which required immune suppression with steroids and a lot of TLC. So support to get through a very difficult time with her intestinal tract not functioning. She needed briefly some more parenteral nutrition until her GI tract recovered enough to heal and get her back out of the hospital. So now she's recovering from graft versus host disease. We're able to reduce her immune suppression. She's eating better, she's gaining weight, she's feeling stronger. We're monitoring her very carefully. She's able to be back at home, feeling more like herself. As a part of her monitoring, we check another bone marrow biopsy, and unfortunately we see that her leukemia has come back. This time, there's not a good treatment that we can offer, and she ends up dying from leukemia. So why am I telling you this story? This is the story of a real patient and patients I see every day. There are a number of steps along the journey where I think we can do better for their care. The first step is making the intensive chemotherapy required to get leukemia in remission easier to tolerate. It has to be strong chemotherapy, but can we do more to support the body as it's recovering from this? So our investigators at the University of Minnesota are looking at new ways to try to support people through this challenging chemotherapy. One of the ways is to see if we can provide microbiota support as they are recovering from chemotherapy. We know that patients very frequently get fevers and antibiotics and secondary infections as a result of those. The next way that we can do better in helping recover from blood and marrow transplant is prevention of graft versus host disease. This is a common complication. Historically, the way that we dealt with this was increasing immune suppression, but this ends up having a result of potentially increased relapse risk. So in this patient, she had a high-risk leukemia. She did get graft versus host disease. It was treated with immune suppression and she got better. But did this allow an opportunity for her leukemia to break through? If we can reduce graft versus host disease and all of the difficulties from that, perhaps we'll have more people who are still here with us because their leukemia or other cancer will have a chance to grow in the environment of very intense immune suppression, and patients won't have to go through the hospitalization and poor nutrition and weight loss that's associated with GVHD, which would be a huge win as well. And so how ACT is helping with this directly is supporting a clinical trial where, just like after the leukemia therapy, we're attempting to restore the intestinal microbiota to see if we can eliminate the GVHD risk, then eliminate the immune suppression that's needed after that, to hopefully have people live better lives without GVHD and reducing their risk of relapse as well.
Ulcerative colitis and graft versus host disease are two areas where major improvements are being made in the field of microbiota therapy. It's now my pleasure and privilege to introduce our keynote speaker this evening, Dr. Alexander Kortz. Dr. Kortz is the medical director at the University of Minnesota Microbiota Therapeutics program, with world-renowned pioneering work in the field of intestinal microbiota transplants. Partnered with Achieving Cures Together, This program has helped treat over 800 patients with C. difficile infections at a success rate of 98%. The program has also revolutionized the encapsulating process of microbiota material, encapsulating it in pill form. As a result, these pills can be distributed and used in nationwide clinical trials. Again, it is my pleasure and privilege to introduce Dr. Alexander Colitis.
My name is Alex Koritz. I'm the medical director of the University of Minnesota Microbiota Therapeutics Program. I appreciate this chance to talk to you and our partners, Achieving Cures Together, about our program and what's been happening over the past 6 months or so. Our mission, foundational mission, was to take care of C. diff patients with difficult infections, Clostridium difficile, that they can't cure with standard therapies, which is antibiotics. Then that evolved into a much bigger mission because we realized that the gut microbes is actually a new frontier of medicine because they're integrated with the rest of the body and affect all kinds of diseases. So our mission, in addition, is to support a variety of clinical trials that target gut microbiota. Gut microbiota is a term that refers to all the microbes that live in the intestinal tract. We know today that the gut microbes play some role in development of many common diseases. These include inflammatory bowel disease like Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. They include disorders of energy metabolism such as obesity, diabetes, perhaps anorexia nervosa. They affect neurologic development, and there is evidence they're involved in disorders like autism. As you can imagine, this new target is of great interest to commercial interests and drug companies. It is an entirely new world. However, that also comes with its own problems. The drug companies, the way they develop their therapeutics, they think first about profit, only second or third about patients. And therefore, they're very risk averse in undertaking clinical trials that might somehow derail their path to approval and rewarding their investors. Therefore, our mission really is to support academic clinical trials that are not hindered by those other considerations. This is why we have collaborators now across the country doing clinical trials for a variety of indications. There's a group in Arizona State University led by Dr. Adams who's focused on autism. Its preliminary results have shown marked improvement in the gastrointestinal function of autism patients, as well as improvements in their behavior. This has led to a much larger study, and now there's hundreds of patients just on the waiting list to get into the study. The only limiting reagent is our ability to supply the drug and the placebo. Another trial example is a group in Baltimore led by Dr. Dutta. He's studying Parkinson's disease. Now that disease, at least a fraction of patients, appears to originate in the gut and migrate up to the brain where it causes degeneration of the motor system. That trial is almost to start in November. We have a trial in Virginia that is focused on alcohol and alcohol-related liver disease led by Dr. Jaz Bajaj. His preliminary results have shown, remarkably, that correcting the microbial composition in the gut of those patients somehow improves or lessens the alcohol cravings. Alcoholism is not the most popular disease to study with the public. It is really an underserved population. Here in the University of Minnesota, we also have a couple trials led by local investigators. Dr. Armin Rashidi and Shernan Holton are leading a trial in bone marrow transplant patients who are particularly vulnerable to infections and a disease called graft versus host disease. Both are complications of what we do to the gut microbes during their treatment. They get a lot of antibiotics, and in that context, when the new immune system develops, it attacks the host and is responsible for the majority of non-cancer mortality. And Dr. Byron Vaughn is leading a trial in ulcerative colitis. Now, I should say we're developing very specialized formulations for these different trials. So that is somewhat different than just spurting any healthy microbes. There's a lot of research that needs to go into that. This is still investigational therapy. We don't want to charge patients for it on principle. Many patients wouldn't be able to afford the cost. We don't want anyone to suffer. So we have a somewhat different model. We ask our patients if they would consider donating to the program, not to pay for their treatment, but to help the next person in need. None of this would be possible without our partner, Achieving Cures Together. We're not only challenging medical paradigms and exploring new frontiers of what is possible in medicine, we're actually challenging all paradigms in medicine. We're not about money. We're trying to help people. We're trying to move science forward. Thank you.
Well, we have achieved so much in 5 short years. The reality is, there are still many people and families that are still suffering, but we have a potential tool to alleviate the problem. For $7,500, this provides treatment for one patient with ulcerative colitis. For $5,550, this provides treatment for 10 patients with recurrent C. difficile infections. For $1,100, this provides treatment for 2 patients with recurrent C. difficile infections. For $600, this provides treatment for 1 patient with otherwise fatal C. difficile infection. Today, your dollar goes even further with the generous match as previously mentioned. For this week only, all donations up to $70,000 will be matched, allowing you to double your investment into a cure. Please consider joining and partnering with us on this journey together, working with the best and brightest researchers in their field to understand these diseases and to progress cures. To donate, go to achievingcures.com/donate, or you can mail your donation to the address on the screen. While it's no secret that 2020 has thrown just a few curveballs to life as we know it, it only intensifies the need to continue to progress this important research. So much has been accomplished in these last 5 years, including supplying treatments to over 800 C. difficile patients, as well as supplying microbiota therapeutics to a variety of nationwide clinical trials. We are still at the tip of the iceberg of uncovering the healing potential of restoring damaged gut microbes. And so many other applications exist, such as with Parkinson's disease, diabetes, autoimmune disorders, advanced liver disease, obesity, allergies, and so many more. We will continue to fund research and progress cures, but many more will still suffer. We can solve that in time. The question is, when? The answer? That lies with you. Thank you again for your time this evening and for partnering with us on this journey to progress cures further. It wouldn't be possible without the generosity of each and every one of you. We hope that you and your family stay safe during this challenging time, and we look forward to the day that we can celebrate all the incredible achievements and advancements that you've made possible.